Sandy Wyllie. Welcome to my mental health channel, where I wipe away the stigma of mental illness by talking about my own struggles with borderline personality disorder. I talk about narcissism, post-traumatic stress disorder, anxiety, depression, all the different types of therapies available out there and therapists. But I come on as a former patient of almost 20 years. I am not a licensed therapist. I do not hold a degree in psychology, so I cannot give you a diagnosis or a professional opinion. All I do is talk about my own experiences and struggles as a former patient, having borderline personality disorder, post-traumatic stress disorder, anxiety disorder, depression, and attention deficit disorder, and obsessive compulsive disorder. That's a long laundry list right there. I've had a schizophrenic father and a narcissistic mother who used to badly beat me. Now, in return, all I ask of you is please be kind in the comments. Be kind to me, be kind to everyone that comments. We don't need to agree on everything, but we do need to agree on being kind to one another. If you're new to my channel, welcome. Hit the subscribe button because it's 100% free, and you'll be alerted when new videos come up that I post. They will alert you if you're a subscriber. If you like what you see, hit the like button too. It always helps to know, who likes my videos. And please do feel free to comment and share your own experiences with me. Now today, I'm going to talk about, is it because I'm a borderline? Now, I'm going to be 59 years old next month. And most of my 50s, I've done a lot of soul searching and a lot of self-analysis, especially the last 3 years since I quit therapy. Took two psychologists to the licensing board. Both of them sexually abused me, Dr. Richard Geist and Dr. James Barberia. And I have all the links to that stuff in books I've written about those two abusive therapists down below. So I've been pretty much free and on my own to do my own self-analysis without any professional help. Now, I already know I have borderline personality disorder, but since I know that, I'm aware of the symptoms of that and how I react, and I react very strongly. I have intense emotions. I act much different than someone who does not have borderline personality would act in the same circumstances. And so I often question myself, and I'm going to give you an example that makes me question, gee, did I act that way because of my personality disorder, or would someone else act the same way in the same circumstances that did not have my personality disorder? Now, my son, Alex, he has traumatic brain injury. He grew up, he was autistic. We learned that around the age of 2.5 to 3. We learned he was autistic. And then at 4 years old, he got pneumococcal meningitis and he almost died. He spent 2 years in a hospital as a result of that infection. And also encephalitis. Like when you get the mosquito bites, you can get encephalitis. It eats away your brain. You can die from encephalitis. Well, he almost died. He was in a coma for all of Easter weekend, the whole weekend. And as a result, he has permanent brain damage and he needs to be institutionalized. And he has impulsiveness like me, and he has aggression like me from the brain damage. I have mine from having borderline personality disorder, and my father had his from having schizophrenia, that impulsiveness, that aggression, and my mother had hers because she was a narcissist. So different ailments, different mental health issues with the same, symptoms. Impulsiveness and aggression. So he's been in institutes since he was 2 years in the hospital, and then when he was 6, he went to one institute where he was raped, and then another institute. I can't name these names because I don't want to be liable and sued. Another institute where he was brutally beaten and tortured, and then he was kicked out. Now he's in a third institute. And the head of the place called us and told us that he was acting very aggressive toward other people there, and they called 911. They called the police on my son. I was very upset because I thought they should have been able to handle it. After all, this is an institution that takes care of severely handicapped people. And I thought that they shouldn't be calling the police on my son. My son has, severe outbursts because of his brain injury. And I informed these people before they, took him in that my son does have, these episodes of aggressions. He's also an invalid. He can't bathe himself. He can't go to the bathroom by himself. And he has a vocabulary of a 2-year-old. So, and he has no self-awareness, no danger perception. He couldn't cross the street by himself or anything like that. He can't read, he can't write, he can't sign his name or anything. Then she called back the next day and said he was acting aggressive again, and she had to call the police again. And he was in the ER, and she said he can't come back. I went ballistic. She said he can't come back until he has a psych eval, which means they'd have to lock him up in a mental ward somewhere, where they, if anyone has mental illness here, I know some people who subscribe to me do and have been hospitalized for mental illness, where they strap you down and they inject you to make you unconscious if you act out. The horrible things that go on in mental hospitals, my father told me, because he went to McLean's hospital for his schizophrenia. So he told me how it is. If you don't toe the line, they'll just give you a shot and knock you out. It's pretty brutal, Even my father knew that. You just agree with everything they say. Otherwise, they're going to, knock you out, like darting an animal, darting a lion in Africa to tranquilize them. They do that on mentally sick people. And a lot of other horrific things that I'm not going to go into in this video. All I want to get across in this video is my response, okay? So when she told me that, that he couldn't come back unless he had a psych eval, which means that, basically he'd have to be locked up in a mental ward, and they'd have to run a whole bunch of tests on him, and if he acted aggressive, they'd probably tie him up in a straitjacket, yada, yada, yada. At the moment when she said this, he was in the emergency room, okay? And they were doing blood work on him. Blood work, they can tell a lot about a person through blood work, quite a lot. And they did find out what was happening to him, but I'll get into that later. So when she told me that, I went right off on her, okay? I started screaming and telling her, hey, don't you dare mess with me. You don't know who the hell you're playing with, right? No one does that to my son. My son has been, beaten. He's been tortured. He's been kicked out of his last residence. I'll get a lawyer. I just was, screaming at her, going off, making threats to her, telling her I'm going to sue her, sue the place, that you don't mess with me, like threatening her, like, don't you dare mess with me. You don't know what you're getting in for. I was saying this to the head of his place. So the woman, I guess, put the phone away from her like that, right? And she said, what? I can't hear you. So I know she wasn't paying attention to what I was saying. She was holding the phone far away from her ears, and not listening to my ranting. So anyway, I hung up. They ran a lot of more blood tests, and they found out my son was acting aggressive because he was critically low sodium. My son has a health problem where his body retains fluids, and then if he drinks too much on top of that, he'll have too too much fluid. I don't know. It was because, the blood work showed low white blood count and that he was critically ill, that he was retaining sodium, and they had to get that level of sodium down. So he had to be admitted to the hospital, but not in the psych ward. Just like a regular patient going to the hospital because they're sick. And that's what was causing the problem. And I was really relieved when I found that out. So, because then it means he didn't have to go to the psych ward. He had a physical, illness. They said he was acting aggressive because of low sodium. And I talked to a friend on Facebook who said her mother acted the same way when she had low sodium. She became aggressive. And the doctors told me, yes, his behaviors were caused because of his low sodium, and we need to get his sodium levels back up. So then I realized, oops, I probably shouldn't have went off on the head of the house, threatening her, saying, don't mess with me, I'll get a lawyer and sue you, you don't want to mess with me and everything, and yelling at her and going off on her. But the truth is, my husband, that's his son too. He did not react in the same way that I did. He was very calm, and, he did not react like that. So I wonder, is it because of my mental illness, because I have borderline personality, that I snap at people and I go off on people like that? When my husband didn't act that way whatsoever. He acted very calm. Also, in all fairness to that woman, my son was going after other people living in that house. Other people who had handicaps, other handicapped people. There are people with Down syndrome in that house. That residence is for handicapped people. And she said he was aggressively going after. She didn't tell me specifically what he did. Maybe I'll find that out this weekend, what he did. But he was going after very aggressively. Maybe he hurt someone. I don't know. I didn't get the whole story, but she has to protect the other people who live at that house, right? She's the head of the house. I mean, if my son is hurting someone else, she just can't allow my son to beat up on someone who had Down syndrome, right? Any more than it would be okay for someone who lived at that residence to beat up on my son. She has to protect everyone. So later on, I realized that she could not let him back into that house if he was going to beat up on other people, including the staff people too. It was not just the residents, it was the staff, it was everyone he became extremely violent with. So I realized, she has to protect everyone. She can't keep my son there if he's going to keep, aggressively hurting people, including the staff and including the other residents, the other people that my son lives with that are severely handicapped. Later on, I called her up and, she didn't answer, so I left an apology saying I'm sorry that I went off on you, But it makes me wonder, every time I do something like that, I wonder, is it because I have borderline personality disorder that makes me go off and get hyper, emotional and threaten people? Is that common among borderlines, that they threaten people when they become hurt or scared? And I was very scared for my son that he was going to be in a psych ward. I became very scared, so I threatened her. I threatened to take legal action. I threatened her. I said, "Don't mess with me. You don't. I threatened her. Okay, on the phone." So. There was another time too, and it involved my son. All these incidences involved my son, where I don't know who I was talking to, but I started screaming on the phone, and the woman said to me, "Is this the way you always talk to people?" This is what she said. "Is this the way you always talk to people?" She said, "Calm down." don't stop yelling at me. It's like, it's not her fault, right? Why am I being abusive to her? You see what I'm saying? She was saying I was being abusive to her by yelling and getting hysterical on the phone when she didn't do anything wrong. I was just trying to relate something that happened to my son, and I got very worked up in relating that story. Does that ever happen to you? Like, even in therapy, if you're in therapy and you're talking about a traumatic incident in the past, right? And you're trying to talk about it with your therapist, and you get very worked up, and you start, yelling, and it's not your therapist's fault. Like, if you talk about, my mother used to beat me, she used to chase me around the living room with a heavy spatula and leave bleeding welts on me, and you start getting worked up and start screaming and start pacing or start, acting like you're going to be aggressive, and, you're just relaying a story about someone else that harmed you. Like, you get worked up. It's like reliving it. Like when I was like getting post-traumatic stress disorder. I was worried they were going to kick him out. Like the last place, he was kicked out. They kicked him out because they wanted to whitewash what happened. Because a person beat him up there, and other people saw that, and they didn't say anything. They just turned a blind eye. They didn't want to get involved. So it wasn't just the person who beat him up that they ended up firing. It was the other people who saw it and didn't say anything, which is, you're just as guilty. If you see something harmful and you don't speak up, you're just as guilty as a person because you're covering for someone like that, right? Well, when I got off the phone from her, I said, geez, I did yell at that woman. And that woman, I don't know who she was, if she was a patient advocate, I don't know, but she wasn't involved in whatever the incident I was talking about. She wasn't involved in all. She was just like a stranger, and I was going off yelling and getting hysterical, and so us, at least for me as a borderline, I always question my reactions. Did I react that way because I have borderline personality disorder? My husband didn't act that way at all. He didn't threaten the staff. He acted very calmly because he does not have a personality disorder. He doesn't have a mental health issue like I do. So everything is compounded with me because of my mental health issue. So when something like that happens with my son, it's compounded with me. Then I start drinking vodka again because of what happened with my son, because it's just too much for me to handle. Is that because I have borderline personality disorder? Borderlines often abuse substances. And at a time, normally I was doing really well just drinking 2 glasses of wine every night. Now I started drinking vodka on top of the wine since this happened with my son. Again, in this new place. It seems like every place he goes to, there's always a severe problem. Like I never get I never get a break from it, Maybe I feel that way just because of my personality disorder. Maybe someone else would be able to handle it more maturely and wouldn't take other people's heads off. But it always has me questioning, did I react that way because I'm borderline? It's just an extra monkey on my back when life throws me a curveball. That I have borderline personality disorder, and I come from that place of having a personality disorder. So when things happen to me, it compounds the problem. You understand what I'm saying? I don't react like a person without a personality disorder would. It compounds the problem, and I become much more, emotional, much more unstable, turning to substances like alcohol and threatening people, like staff, when things go wrong. I just can't handle it. It's just too much on me to handle. All right, let me know what you think about that, if you have any thoughts or comments.